Well, it's everybody's favorite season, inventory time. And that's why we've been going through and counting everything that we have in stock at Blissoma, and it is quite the process. We have hundreds of ingredients that we keep in stock, and this is the sort of thing that we do partly because the government requires it and partly because it's just good business. We need to know what we have on hand. And so as I've been going through that process, I had some thoughts about what would make a good next video, because I have also been having to go through and update the prices on everything that we have bought this last year. Sometimes, some years, I have been able to get away with just updating key things because prices were relatively stable on most items. This year, with pandemic and all kinds of other disruptions occurring, whether it's due to weather or labor shortages or other issues, there are a lot of things that have changed in price. And so I'm basically having to go through that spreadsheet line by line and update everything. And it is quite a tedious process. It is taking me weeks of effort to do. And it brought up some thoughts for me, and I wanted to share those with you guys. So this video is actually covering the 3 big reasons that most mass market skincare companies don't really want to base their products on natural ingredients. And, as somebody that has a business based on natural ingredients, some of those reasons I can understand. But I happen to feel like it's worth the effort to do so. And I have a lot of customers that think it's worth the effort. But let's go over some of those key reasons that a big company might not want to base their product on plant-based ingredients. And I think that if you look out there and take a look at what is generally out there in the market for bigger brands, what you'll see a lot of the time is a maybe more synthetic base. Like, even if it's a company that uses herb extracts or whatever as actives, you'll often see those as just a small percentage of the overall formula. The rest of the formula, the base emulsion, will be made with something more synthetic. So that is what is generally found out there. Whereas like Blissoma products, we are actually using natural ingredients for the entirety of the recipe. And so there are some things and challenges that brings up in our business. So without further ado, let's discuss why a bigger company might find it challenging to work this way. Reason number 1 is cost. So business is really fundamentally, for most businesses, about making money. And cost is a factor for most companies, especially when you're producing thousands of units of something. The little costs really start to add up. And the fact of the matter is, non-botanically based ingredients are generally, as a rule, considerably cheaper than plant-based ones. So I actually did a few calculations on a few ingredients for you guys, and I'm going to share those in just a second. And this is true whether or not the ingredient is petroleum-based or otherwise, but I will say one of the things about petroleum ingredients is that the vast amount of the work in using them actually is already done by the time they reach the cosmetic market, because it's really being extracted from the ground for fuel and other uses. And then as that oil gets split up into multiple fractions, the byproducts essentially get sold into the cosmetic market as raw materials for use. So the true cost of those ingredients is not really being passed on in that sense, because they're really being extracted for use in fuel purposes. So you're getting the benefit of that. However, we have only about 50 years of oil left in the ground. So no matter what, this is going to be a challenge that all cosmetic businesses are going to run up against. And I mean, we're all running up against this as a society anyway. But so petroleum-based ingredients won't be cheap forever, because there is a limit to them. Fossil fuels are not so great for us. And so that's one thing to consider. There are plenty of cosmetic ingredients that are not necessarily petroleum based. So For those, there still is generally a lower cost because you're working with raw materials that are more easy to acquire or are more broadly available, or where more can just be synthesized as needed. Whereas when you're dependent on plant-based ingredients, you are dependent on the natural cycles, the seasons, growing conditions, all of that. So that tends to affect things quite a lot. And I have looked up the pricing for ingredients like PEG 12 oleate, which is, so polyethylene glycol is a petroleum-based ingredient, as is butylene glycol, which is one of the next. There are some sustainable butylene glycols and propylene glycols, but the vast majority being used out there are still non-bio-based versions and generally will be petroleum feedstock. So PEG 12 oleate, anything with polyethylene glycol in it, is going to be ethylene oxide based, and that is a petroleum oil gas based ingredient. So a 40-pound container of that sells for $403.20, and that sounds like a lot, but that ends up being about $10 a pound or $22.38 per kilo. Butylene glycol, which is an emollient, a humectant that is used in products, it sells for $329 for 40 pounds, similar amount, and that works out to $8.23 a pound or $18.28 a kilo. Another synthetic ingredient that can be used as an emollient are silicones, and I looked up the price for amodimethicone. So that's a little bit more expensive than those previous two at $677.10 for 40 pounds, which works out to $37.61 per kilo. So you're paying a little bit more for something like that. Silicones are well beloved by the cosmetic industry for the feel that they impart and for their dispersing properties, and for the fact that they do leave a nice finish on the skin. So let's discuss the price of organic cranberry seed oil. Organic cranberry seed oil costs $175 a kilo, depending on the supply source you buy from. Of course, I'm sure there are some people paying more and there are some people paying less. These are price quotes obtained through more modestly sized suppliers. So I'm sure there are larger companies getting better deals than this on their cranberry seed oil, but you get the idea. The problem becomes it is difficult to extract some of these natural materials. There is a limit to the number of cranberry seeds available for extraction, for pressing every year, and those availabilities change, of course, depending on how much has been grown and who's buying, and the market takes a while to develop. So that leads us into our next reason that a large company might not want to base their product fully on plant-based ingredients, and that is supply chain problems. So this encompasses things like you're having to plan very far in advance for the purchases that you need to make. So you're likely planning at least a year in advance for the materials that you're going to need, because you may have to commission a farmer to grow for you rather than just finding something to buy right when you need it. And frequently that will mean actually funding that farmer at the beginning of the growing season. So you're not giving them money right when you get the product, you're giving them money like 6 to 8 months in advance of when you're going to get the item, or potentially even sooner. And so that means your financial life gets a lot more complicated because you're having to sink a lot more into inventory that you don't even have on hand yet. And so that's one of the challenges. Then there's things like climate change, natural disasters, droughts, other issues like that. This last year, the calendula supply was pretty severely affected in the United States by a drought and by hot weather conditions in the Pacific Northwest. So one of the growers that we rely on, their crop was drastically affected to where they couldn't even fill all of their pre-orders. So even the companies that had bought from them in the springtime, they couldn't fill that entire amount that people had paid for in the spring. They had to inform clients that, hey, we just don't have it this year because the plants just did not produce because of the heat. So when a plant gets too hot, it's stressed and it doesn't flower, because flowering actually takes a lot of energy from that plant. It's a reproductive activity. It needs a lot of resources to be able to do that. And when it's stressed, it just won't do that very well. There are plants that might flower but not allow their blossoms to become fertilized in some situations, but lots of plants just won't really blossom. Green beans will do the same here in the United States, not in the United States, but green beans will do the same here in Missouri. Lots of times, if the weather was over 90 degrees, I'd be watering my green bean vines all summer long, and they still wouldn't make a single bean until like around September, when the temperatures would reliably drop below 90 degrees, like into the high 80s. And then the plant would say, finally, I can make my flowers, I can make my beans. Yay, let's do it. But you don't always have that luxury when you're dealing with a crop that you need to be harvesting all season. And an annual crop like calendula is something that you should be harvesting for months at a time, because the plants should be just producing more blossoms as the summer goes on. If that doesn't happen, you've got a problem. And so climate change has been causing a lot of problems for farmers all across the US and worldwide. There can also be situations like natural disasters. I remember when I first started getting into aromatherapy and making things with essential oils, there was actually a patchouli shortage for a year or so, because there was volcanic activity in Indonesia that ended up ruining the crop supply for a little while. And that's just one of those facts of life. You can't just necessarily make more. You have to work with farmers, and the farming cycle is a year to a year and a half. And even if there's a shortage and other people see that market opportunity, it's going to take them a while to convert their land over, to learn how to grow a new crop. And so there is a lead time, and that means that the supply can be very limited each year unless you have planned very appropriately. I mean, it's limited no matter what. But if you have planned appropriately, hopefully you've arranged to get what you need for your product. Hopefully you've done your projections and all of that, but it does mean that that work is a lot more intensive. We have to know what we need far in advance of need, and we can't just serve a big client that might come along and say, hey, would you like to make us 10,000 units of this particular product? Well, I might want to do that, but if I don't have those botanical materials arranged for, I may be able to get them and I may not. So scalability becomes an issue for plant-based companies, because we can't necessarily acquire more of the materials that we need right at a moment's notice. We have to grow organically. And that organic growth is really the most stable way to grow. And that's how our company has actually been able to reach new people and handle the growth that we have, is because we have grown slowly. But a lot of big companies don't like that model. They want to grow quickly. They want to double or triple business in a year. And that's just not necessarily possible with plant-based materials, especially if your product is only, using 1 or 2% extracts, or maybe even 5% extracts, let's be generous, then you can probably work that out. But if you have a recipe that has, say, 10 to 20 different plant-based ingredients in it, you're in the middle of a sourcing challenge right there. You have a lot of things that you have to work on finding and maintaining supply of. And that's just something that a lot of companies don't want to invest that time in. So that is one thing that makes plant-based companies really and truly special, because we are putting that time in to make sure that we have the materials that we need to make you your products. I have one more reason for you. And this is my final reason for now on why bigger companies might not want to focus on plant-based ingredients for the majority of their product. And it is something for which I actually have a little sample of right here. So this is licorice root extract, and it is a handmade extract that we are producing ourselves. You can see the root in there. You can see the liquid is brown, and whole plant-based extracts that are not refined have this sort of a look to them. And they might be a lighter brown, they might be a darker brown, some of them are kind of golden. And the thing about whole plant extracts in particular, and this is, of course, there's a wide variety of plant-based extracts and ingredients out there. Some are fermented, some are more refined. I'm speaking particularly about whole plant extracts here. Whole plant extracts have a color and a smell. And that's not something that works with a lot of mass market products, because those larger companies tend to want to make products that are white or clear, and they want to make products that they can color any way they want to, if they have a desire to color it. So maybe they want it to be light pink, or maybe they want it to be light blue, or they want it to be purple. And these kind of ingredients don't color so well. They have their own color already, and usually it's kind of muddy and earthy looking. Some of them also are stinky. So we make a hops-based extract for one of our toners, and hops are so good for your skin. They have all kinds of amazing antioxidant properties. They're really good for acne-prone skin, and they stink like crazy. And you've probably, if you've ever used neem oil or anything like that, you've probably noticed that stuff's incredibly stinky. A lot of the most medicinal plants, unfortunately, are quite aromatic in less than pleasant ways. And that is something that, as a formulator, my job is to work around and to figure out how to make them palatable and acceptable and even enjoyable for people to use. That is not something that a lot of bigger companies care to spend the time doing. They would really rather be working with something that they can just toss into a product and not worry how it's going to affect the aroma and color profile of the product, since the sensory experience of a product is actually one of the things that people understand best. They may not understand the chemistry behind the product, but they do understand the way it feels and smells and the way it looks when it goes on their skin. So that means that whole plant ingredients are a bit of a challenge for that whole mentality, because they cannot be hidden in a product, really. They're going to show up in their own way. And so you have to work with them in order to make the product pleasant for people to use. You have to move with that color, move with that natural aroma that it has. Like, a lot of natural oils have a very nutty smell to them if they are not processed. And unprocessed oils are much, much, much better for your skin because they contain a lot more nutrients than a processed oil. So that is a big reason that bigger companies do not want to focus entirely on plant-based ingredients for the bulk of their product. It's also a lot easier to cover up a smell or color if it's only 1 or 2 or 5% of a product versus if it's 90%, or if you have product ingredients that have a color and a smell for 90% of that base or more. You're going to be facing a whole different world of issues than if you are putting in 1% of something. So that is something to be conscious of, as a difference between a plant-based product that is majority plant-based and one that's just using a little bit of a plant-based extract. So I hope this has been a fun and educational video for you. If you have any questions, feel free to share them in the comments section. I'll be happy to chat back. If you have any thoughts or, want to counter me in any way, feel free. I'm always happy to speak about my experience. I certainly am always learning things about the broader market as well, and happy to learn something from you too. So if you like this video, please subscribe. I am making videos on the natural skincare world, holistic lifestyle and wellness topics, and basically talking about doing business in an ethical, sustainable way, taking care of my body in an ethical, sustainable way, and hopefully there will be something there for you to enjoy. So I'm Julie. Thanks so much for joining me. Have a great day.